Thank you, member. Recognizing the leader of the House Leader of the third party.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I'll be the designated speaker for the Green Caucus. Despite claims that scrapping the carbon tax will ease financial burdens, studies have repeatedly shown that its impact on affordability is negligible. Since 2019, the carbon price has contributed less than 0.5% to the increases in consumer prices. Some members have repeatedly said that without the carbon tax, petroleum prices will fall. The carbon tax is responsible for around 8.5% of the price of a litre of petrol. In comparison, the refinery margin is over 20%. We know the variability that can happen in fuel prices across this province. We've all experienced it. And the proven ability of petroleum suppliers to not pass on cost savings to consumers. I'll admit to struggling too to consider the carbon tax as an impediment to many British Columbians when in 2024, sport utility vehicles, pickups and minivans made up 85% of new vehicles sold in BC. Regardless, even if British Columbians see a temporary drop at the gas pumps, any expectation that these savings will make a substantive difference to the cost of living crisis will prove illusory. Yes, there may be brief relief for people who drive vehicles in particular, but in a matter of weeks or months, Canadians will face a much harsher reality when they discover that the cost of living remains high and in some cases even higher than before. What's more concerning is that by removing the carbon tax, we're not just eliminating a price on carbon, we're scrapping the climate action tax credit, which provides up to $1,008 per year to a family of 4. This isn't just a theoretical tax change. This is about real families, real people who benefit from this support to help offset the rising cost of living. Lower income households, especially in urban areas with good transit, tend to drive less. It's people who have higher incomes with multiple cars and commutes who will benefit most from this tax cut. And let's be clear, the vast majority of households in this province receive more in rebates than they pay in carbon taxes. So when poverty reduction advocates warn that scrapping this tax will ultimately increase the cost of living for low-income British Columbians, they're not just speculating, they're ringing alarm bells. The carbon tax credit has been around since 2008. 4 times per year, the lowest income British Columbians receive more in a rebate than the carbon tax costs them. In a time of rising costs, household precarity, when food bank usage is the highest it's ever been, when income and disability assistance remains static, why is this government removing one of the few constants upon which people can rely? According to the province's own figures, 557,000 people live below the poverty line in 2024, including 150,000 children. Families making less than $57,288 were able to receive the full credit. For these households, the loss of this credit may be the straw that breaks their backs. And for single people without children, who make up the largest group of people in poverty, the carbon rebate is one of the only supports that they can access. Yet, we have heard from the government that they intend to end the rebate with no replacement and with no plan for how to arrest the slide of large numbers of this province's citizens below the poverty line. With the U.S. implementing tariffs on Canada, the rebate is needed more than ever. We know that low-wage workers are probably going to feel the brunt of tariffs, and we know government must have supports in place to support them. What supports are in place? A one-time $110 ICBC rebate for those that have vehicles. That's not enough of a plan to offset the hardship we're about to face. Last year, the Premier warned that cutting the carbon tax would result in significant increases in income taxes for people and companies because the government would need to recoup the lost revenues. This is perhaps a good time to remind the House that when the carbon tax was introduced in 2008, both personal and corporate income tax rates were cut as a result. And so we may lose the carbon tax, a measure that was progressive, incentivized environmental behaviors, and provided revenue to the lowest income British Columbians, to be replaced with a blanket rise in rates or with a great big gap in the budget. The bill currently before the House deals only with the removal of the carbon tax and doesn't speak to the government plans to recoup this revenue. And so I can speak only today to what we see before us. The budget projects revenue of $3.046 billion from the carbon tax in 2025-26, increasing at an average of 11% per year. We understand that $2.8 billion of that $3 billion is from the consumer carbon tax, and the remaining $200 million from industrial polluters. Even with the elimination of the carbon rebate, there is still a hole of $1.5 billion in the provincial budget. Previously, the deficit was projected at $10.9 billion. Can we now assume that it will be $12.5 billion, or can we expect cuts to core services that people rely on? How will the organizations relying on the carbon tax, like TransLink and BC Transit, cope with these shortfalls? How will our Clean BC programs be impacted? We don't have the answers yet. What we do know is that removing the carbon tax won't come without significant consequences. Now let's talk about the larger picture. Politicians are abandoning the carbon tax because many Canadians are rightly concerned about the rising cost of living, particularly with the soaring prices of groceries and essential goods. The narrative that carbon taxes drive up prices has taken hold, even though, as we've seen, it simply isn't true. This is a narrative common to the NDP and the Conservative opposition. In fact, a new report from the Centre for Future Work reveals something startling. Oil companies, not carbon taxes, are the true culprits behind rising costs. The inflated prices of oil and gas have directly and indirectly cost each Canadian household an average of $12,000 over the past 3 years. The Canadian petroleum industry profited handsomely from the spike in prices in 2022 and the resulting inflation. Industry operating profits grew by a cumulative total of, wait for it, $151 billion from 2022 through 2024. Much of that additional profit was retained by the companies or paid out in dividends to shareholders and executive bonuses. Only a small portion was reinvested in Canada. Employment and wages in the industry remain below 2019 levels. This report warns that without urgent action, this will happen again, especially as geopolitical instability, like Donald Trump's erratic threats of tariffs, soon, I think, to become very real, creates the conditions for another speculative oil price surge. The truth is, this is the truth, this is the science-driven truth. Removing the carbon tax is not a solution to affordability. It's a dangerous step backward. It leaves low-income Canadians, British Columbians, more vulnerable, puts crucial programs at risk, and it fails to address the true drivers of inflation, oil and gas sector profits, and volatile oil prices. If this government were serious about blunting the cost of living, they would implement policies that benefit consumers. 2 examples, such as fully funding the switch to heat pumps, ensuring sufficient clean electricity. This also means rapid scaling up of investments in public transit and charging a windfall profits tax on fossil fuel companies and sufficient royalties on extractive industries. The question we must ask ourselves is this: are we prepared to abandon policies that help to protect our environment, our families, and our future? Are we ready to remove a tax that helps fund important programs, provides support for families, and takes action on climate change, all for the sake of a temporary, illusory break at the pump? Mr. Speaker, my colleague will speak to the impact on the climate, on the future of our planet from this bill. I won't repeat the statements he'll be making, but I know that I agree with him completely. What we have here is a fatally flawed bill which abandons struggling families by eliminating the climate action tax credit. There's no replacement in this bill. There's no plan. This is just a pure removal of the tax. It also abandons the fight against climate change. It's our children and grandchildren that this bill abandons by offering no justifiable alternative in a time of accelerating climate change. Many years from now, all of the members in this House will be reminded of this moment when the carbon tax, an effective measure that deals with climate change, was removed without any plan on how to deal with the climate impact. And finally, abandoning fiscal responsibility by running up another $1.5 billion in the deficit without any plan to replace this source of revenue. And that's not unique to the NDP government. That is the choice that the opposition Conservatives will likely make later today as well, which is, if we have to choose between being fiscally responsible and implementing a policy that makes no sense in the fight against climate change, then we'll pick eliminating the tax. We will abandon our principles of fiscal responsibility, having just come to grips with a very large deficit for this year and the next couple of years. Let's just write off the carbon tax and let's just run up the deficit some more. That is fiscally responsible. The NDP are proposing something that's fiscally responsible, and it's quite likely the opposition Conservative will abandon the rhetoric of the last month around how they're concerned they are about the deficit and say, oh, well, it's a tax, reduce the tax, without any other plan. This bill is bad for the environment, bad for the future of our planet, bad for families, and bad for the province's fiscal situation. We do not support this bill, and we urge the government to withdraw it from the House. And for that reason, Madam Speaker, I make the following motion: that the motion for second reading, and I have an extra copy here I can provide, that the motion for second reading of Bill number 8, entitled Carbon Tax Amendment Act 2025 be amended by deleting all the words after that and substituting, therefore, the following. Bill number 8 not be read a second time until after the Minister of Finance has laid before the House a plan to address the climate crisis, the consequential and increasing budget deficit, and the impact of the loss of financial support to British Columbians. Mr. Speaker.
Thank you, member. We're going to go into recess and make copies and distribute the, motion for amendment to everyone.
And then after that, I'll speak.
Certainly,
motion.
certainly.
Okay. Yeah.
Return. Yeah, we'll go into recess and make copies and circulate to everyone. Be back shortly. I said what I had to say. Speaker's still on. All right, we'll call the committee back. Oh. All right, well, yeah, we'll call it back into session. Everybody's got a copy of the amendment. Continue, please.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. I'm moving this amendment because the government has not proven that they have a responsible and balanced and evidence-based approach to dealing with climate policy. This government has
Member,
not...
just one moment, and just to confirm that the amendment is in order. Thank you. Continue.
Thank you. Thank you, Madam Speaker. This government has not shared any information on how they plan to cut emissions, how they will save costs for families who will no longer receive the rebate, or how progress on climate action will continue. There is no plan to deal with the loss of billions of dollars that are already accounted for in the budget. For these reasons, I hope the House supports this motion and the government comes back with a solution that fully addresses the extent of this problem. Thank you, Madam Speaker.